Hello and welcome back to another episode of 12 Yards Out. Today we're joined by David Webb. David, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I think we're all you guys down south are lucky enough that you can at least watch some sort of football, where we're probably stuck for another month. Well, hopefully it'll be another month. I mean, the news in the last 48 hours as we record this.
Yeah.
I know down south, Leicester's went into like a lockdown or something.
Yeah, it has to. I think from this weekend, the whole country's sort of allowed to go back on to shops and bars and stuff that are open, but Leicester sort of breached those, been a little bit naughty and breached those social distances and other sort of laws that the government put in place. So unfortunately, they're not going to enjoy probably a cold beer in a pub with the rest of the country.
That's quite bad. Anyway, we'll talk about the football today on 12 Yards Out. Can you sort of explain a bit about your role and what it is you do down south?
Yeah, I was just previously at Huddersfield as head of football, which is probably another term for a role like a sporting or technical director. So I assume those responsibilities that that sort of role would have. So it would be working closely with a manager, leading and a strategic process on footballing departments like recruitment, academy analysis, medical, physical conditioning, sports science, those elements, and sort of the daily sort of running the training grounds as well. So that would sort of, you'd envisage all those roles. You'd have more elements. The big part of the role was, I would say, would have been the transition year for Huddersfield, because I was appointed the middle of August last year from my previous club, Sweden. Huddersfield took me out of my contract a little bit early. So it's my first sort of role and responsibility within that was to appoint a new manager. That was kind of the first remit. And the first point of that was to sort of identify a manager that fit into the core values of the club, what the club was associated with, and young manager. We wanted sort of young managers that were up and coming, and we needed sort of a new direction as well to take on that transitional challenge. And then throughout sort of that, my role within the year was to sort of realign departments, and especially sort of from the playing staff perspective in the January transfer window to players that didn't want to be part of the football club anymore. So maybe we could look to loan them out and still retain their value, and bring players in that had more the core values of what Huddersfield Town represents. And aligning with that would have been all the other key departments that fitted the sort of identity and the philosophy of the football club.
It's obviously been it's been a bumpy couple of years. Obviously, you had the high going up to the Premier League and then going down. How has that sort of transition been? Because obviously it'll come with a lot of different factors.
Yeah, it did. As I said, I was only there this year, so unfortunately I wasn't there with the roller coaster of the Premier League. But when I sort of met with the owner and CEO initially, when I was sort of offered the role, that was quite a big of sort of my responsibilities. Would have been that, you know, as you mentioned, that key word was transition, and to transition not just to playing staff and not just the management, but it was just sort of the whole staff, and sort of to realign maybe the community back in with the club as well. So it was quite a big task all round, because when you have new ownership, you have, you know, they want to take the club in a new direction. They've invested heavily into the football club, so you know they want it to adhere to their core values. So part of my role as sort of head of football is to ensure that strategy is in place, and you know, try and lead that as, you know, diligently as I can.
Now, obviously, we're now in a bit of a situation with behind closed door stuff. Like how has that been on your side of things? Obviously, I know the team itself are like down sort of the bottom of the championship just now, but how has your role been during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's affected everyone the same, really. I think football is obviously not as we know it at the moment, so it's strange times for everyone. So Huddersfield was no different. It followed the same protocols and government guidelines as everyone else. And I think, with football coming back, especially in the Championship, I suppose the only pros you can have to it that some players that weren't available before, maybe through long-term injuries or sort of lack of form, can come back and sort of restart again. That gives you a chance to sort of re-strategize and re-energize your squads. But also, in terms of you haven't probably had that time that you'd normally have in a pre-season to maybe sort of fully prepare back for the cluster of games in such a short period of time. So obviously you're aware that you can pick up a lot of injuries. You could lose a lot of players sometimes, especially with the contract situation of players as well. Some players are finishing at the end of June, as we've seen from other football clubs. Some have signed extensions and some haven't. So you've got, there's quite a few challenges to face in this situation, especially if you're a team like Huddersfield, or if you're even at the top end going for promotion. You are under the cosh a little bit, because these cluster of games in such a short space of time are going to be detrimental to how your football club is going forward, and especially with the current climate of the world right now.
I think as well, I don't know, way behind closed doors, it obviously first kicked off in Germany. I just feel like with these games there's like a lack of intensity almost. Like obviously we hear on the telly, if you watch it with the sound, it's still, if you're turning away and not looking at it and you're just hearing the commentary in the background, it sometimes sounds like there's fans there, but for players it must be like playing in like a reserve game almost.
Yeah, it's obviously it's not the same. You haven't got that intensity, you haven't got that support, or even the pressures from the crowd. And especially from home games, they're almost like the 12th man. They've a lot of clubs in England, especially in Germany, have tried to replicate that by filling the seats either with banners or cardboard cutouts of particular fans, and having sort of the fans generating noises in the background to sort of coincide with the flow of the game. So it's to try and make it as realistic as possible without actually them physically being there. But yeah, it's very different, because obviously you can't players can't energise themselves off the fans like they can usually do. But it's one of those cases where everyone's in it together, and it's the same for everyone. And the players can feel like it is kind of a little bit like that with the under-23 games, but I would say probably 99.9% of them are still professional enough to continuation that you're still playing a normal league game. And given where your team potentially is, either it's relegation or playoff places or European places, there's still a lot to play for. So you kind of have to, in a way, sort of block out those elements, because you can't control them. They are what they are at the moment, and you still have to continue sort of being as professional and play your game at the same intensity as you would as if fans were there.
One thing that's been quite interesting for me has been that, particularly in the Championship, a lot of clubs have maybe 2, 3 and 4 loan players.
Yeah.
Quite how have the bigger clubs been to deal with, given the circumstances that we're in?
Yeah, I think especially with, say for example, Huddersfield had, we managed in January, Huddersfield got Emil Rowan from Arsenal, one of their sort of top young talents. And the same with a lot of these clubs, the way they think is they're not an immediate priority to them right now. So, and just unless they've had sort of a real upset in injuries, or the squad has changed dramatically, some players have left, the top clubs won't recall them. So it's just a case of them still developing in continuation as they were, throughout their game time, and then have them back when the season finishes to reassess where they are. That's the understanding that I've had, especially with the understanding with Arsenal, that there was no immediate recall for Emil. They was happy just a continuation and let him continue getting game time, which he was doing quite regularly. And that'd be the same with Chelsea, Man City, Man United, Liverpool, all these players out on loan. As long as they're getting game time, they will be happy for him to continue.
Just from my understanding as well, he's quite highly thought of at Arsenal. Even down here, you've seen him. I think he's got a couple of cup appearances and things like that for Arsenal. And I know they probably think quite highly of him.
Yeah, they do. And I think Mikel, in his previous role at Arsenal's academy, has worked with Emil. So he's got some understanding of his abilities and his personality and temperament as a player, and what his qualities are. I've known Emil, as a player for a long time, probably since the age of 15, 16, from when I was at Tottenham, in my role. And he went to Red Bull Leipzig last year, and he was unfortunate through injury, didn't get the game time he wanted, but just to get that experience of playing for a Bundesliga German club, of the minutes he did play, shows where he is in his development, along with some other very sort of highly thought of crop of English talent going over there as well. And we were quite fortunate to win the race to get him, because there was no shortage of takers for his services in the January transfer window from other UK clubs and clubs in Europe, and especially the German market as well, some really big teams. But because of the relationship I had, and we knew sort of understanding of the player, and what we could guarantee him was guaranteed football as long as he was fit and healthy, and also some development for him as a person, as a man, with our sort of new young managers. And when he had the chance to speak to our managers, his mind was made up, because he thought, this is a place that I can develop for a short term, with the gain of, when I go back to Arsenal, I'm going to have a lot more experience.
Like Emil, both yourself and him have left the UK to widen their horizons in football. Just how important can that be, both professionally and personally, for your development?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic if that sort of opportunity arises, because you learn a lot about yourself as a person, because you're adapting to a new culture, a new language, a completely different way of life to what it's like in the UK. So you're really out your comfort zone, initially when you first start, because you're transitioning yourself. I mean, you've got to go in and hit the ground running with the role you've got to undertake, but you're also learning a lot about yourself doing that as well. So obviously you're being away from family and your familiar surroundings, and fortunate enough in Sweden that the language wasn't too much of a problem, because they speak really good English. So and the head coach was English, and some of the staff was English, but even the Swedish staff within the club, Östersund, all of them were fluent English speakers, and a lot of the town was as well. So, and the country. So I think when you venture out abroad, that was one of the things to me that to learn sort of at my age of doing that sort of job, where you're going to maybe have to learn another language, or at least get equipped to it. That was one of their sort of attractions as well, that you could communicate effectively and still do your job, because English was a very strong language within that. So all I had to learn was, the main thing was the cultural changes, definitely the weather, because it was it makes probably makes Scotland warm at times. It was that cold.
I don't know about that, by the way.
Yeah, but no, and I think if you get those challenges, especially if you're a British sort of in the recruitment area or coaching area, and you get the chance to go abroad and develop yourself and develop your skills, it's I would encourage to do so.
A lot of people I hear that have gone abroad for football experience, obviously it's great and it's great for development, but you still don't see a lot of people doing it. You see like French football, Spanish, they're all over the world. English and footballers from the UK don't tend to really. It's rare to see them go out their comfort zone.
Yeah, it is, and obviously it could be sort of personal preference on the person. You definitely seeing a more of a younger crop of talent, especially from the UK, going like to countries like Germany now, and they're following suit with what the French did maybe sort of 3-4 years ago, when they was going over at 17, 18 and getting the opportunity to play top level Bundesliga football. And the English crop of talent coming through over the last 2 or 3 years have been about like a golden generation, if you like, with Sancho and Reece Nelson and Phil Foden. Emil would be in that, Ryan Brewster and Rabbi Matondo, and they've all a lot of them players have experienced the German market and gone over and done reasonably respected well. Obviously Sancho's quite well renowned for what he's doing, but they see it now, I think, with the Bundesliga clubs, they're not frightened to put top talent in their first team. So I think for players that they see that, as long as they can see pathways and development, and if they're at a big Premier League club and they can probably maybe not envisage their pathway getting through quickly, they know probably as an 18, 19-year-old, if they go to a Bundesliga club, then they're going to get the opportunity to play football and, you know, expose their talents. And there's a few more coaches, I would say, looking to go out there now. My ex-colleague Paul Mitchell just took on sporting director role at Monaco, which is, you know, a fantastic job, and he was at Red Bull previous to that, Red Bull Leipzig. So I think you just have to be open-minded. You know, for my next adventure, you know, I'm definitely open-minded if a European opportunity became available again, because you learn so much about yourself and your development, and I think it teaches you so much as a person that you can, you know, adapt and communicate in different ways that you never thought you could. And it gives you obviously a better range of contacts, you know, a different style of football, but also that just that whole experience is you know, is really useful in your personal and professional development.
Yeah, one of the couple of other bullet points we put down is obviously the transfer window impact. Obviously, that's just is it open up here? I don't even know. I'm just seeing transfers going here and there. It seems to be there, but there doesn't seem to be of any like guidance on it from anybody.
No, no, you're right. There's no sort of fixed dates at the moment. There's no sort of period what we're used to where it's open at this date and closes at this date. There is clubs are still being active, especially some of the bigger clubs that can be sort of very, very active, as we've seen. And they sort of sign players that are due to arrive at a later date, and they've already signed pre-contracts and stuff like that. And there's players being linked with, especially the bigger clubs. But I think what this has done now, this situation, especially with the game in the UK, myself speaking to sort of other colleagues in similar positions, that even within the Premier League, it's going to force them to look at their recruitment strategies very differently in terms of what they're going to be prepared to spend on players in the UK and abroad, and also probably to look further within their own academies and their own development squads, and players that maybe potentially have been overlooked for a variety of reasons might, you know, get their chance to be, you know, to have a second look, because no one knows the financial impact what it is really going to have on football at the moment. And if you're well equipped and you already have a pool of players in your academy and your development squad, I think especially sort of the mid to lower down Premier League and definitely Championship clubs definitely be looking at those routes first. Obviously, they're still going to want to spend at other clubs, but I think the loan market will be very strong. Free transfers, there'll be a lot of free transfers. That will be very strong. So I just think it will sort of change the whole dynamic of where we were in football. It's definitely not going to be the same as it was going forward.
No, the one thing I was thinking as well is, see, it's almost like doubters of the English Premier League sort of Championship, all the money that's been involved, have sort of been waiting almost for that financial bubble to burst. Like the money just keeps going up and up and up and up. I think now we'll probably see it going down. Eventually, this is the first time since this is all kicked off, I think, that we've seen a proper challenge in that front.
Yeah, it will be, and that will be the challenge for football clubs, because no one will know when fans are allowed back in, because obviously there's a big loss in revenue stream for that. There's sponsorships and commercials, and the player trading is a big part of the life and soul of a football club. Some, you know, I'd say a good high percentage of clubs need player trading to survive, as well as sort of coincide with sort of their revenue incomes from their fans coming through sort of the gates. So without those two being fully functional and active at the moment, it's definitely going to have to be to sort of put the brakes on a little bit, restock, recheck, and reevaluate where they are.
How much sort of foresight did clubs in England have of everything that was about to come? Because I remember speaking to some of the clubs up here about potential plans for games being suspended or games going behind closed doors. And this was, I believe it was the start of March, and there's nothing in place. I'm sure the response was they hadn't even considered it yet. Was that kind of a similar case down south?
Yeah, I think so, because I think no one knew when this first started coming out, no one knew the impact it would have. And I don't think, not just football, I don't think society was prepared for what happened. So it's football. I think, especially the clubs in the UK, just had to adapt and go with what the government guidelines were at the time, and for a long period of time, not knowing if it was going to come back even this season. So your protocols in place was still to keep the players active, remotely, doing individual plans and diets, and stimulating as much as you can remotely until those sort of guidelines and those rules were relaxed a little bit, and then training was started gradually back introduced. So no one really had the foresight to see what was going to happen, or the impact it was going to happen. It's just a case of adapting of when it did, and sort of rolling with the punches, really.
I don't think what helped clubs either was that the government, especially probably down south, was mass gatherings are fine, this is fine, this is fine. 2 days later, oh no, it's not fine, we're canned until further notice. I don't think that just added to the already uncertain waters that were to come.
Yeah, it did, and there was a lot of politics going on. Obviously, that didn't probably didn't help society, and obviously that had an impact on sport and especially football. So yeah, and it's still going to be a lot of teething snags to be ironed out now. It's not going to be a smooth ride going forward because we're still not out of this situation. So it's good to see football back on, and it's good to see that fans are getting to support their team from home and sort of having access and trying to be involved as much as they can. But when the season finishes, it's just going to have to be sort of a look at, okay, this is what's going to be the protocols going forward for the next season, and no one knows at this stage what that looks like.
We were also talking there as well about sort of the transition from individual training to then contact training. We're about to go through sort of the same process up here. How did you go in Huddersfield?
Yeah, and I think it was just we had to wait for the guidelines to what we could do. Germany obviously started ahead before anyone else within that, because they probably had less risk in terms of their society and less cases. So they deemed it safer for football to return earlier than the UK. So, clubs were a little bit behind on that. So we just had to sort of follow the protocols of X amount of time would be sort of individual training, with players coming in small groups. Players, couldn't shower or use the facilities. They was literally coming in, doing what they had to do from an individual perspective to start off with, then going home. And then you can start getting to small groups again, sort of non-contact, and then and then it just had to be built up gradually. But it was I think all the clubs were led by what was going on, what were the guidelines, what could they do. So it is kind of strange, I think, for players when they first come in from what they're used to, because they can't just come into the training ground and their normal routines are completely different. So there is that adaptation period. But I think the sense of realism hit home that when it's global like this and everyone's in the same situation, it's kind of a more of an acceptance than just if it was sort of individual clubs or individual leagues going through this. So I think it's over a period of time, they're professionals. They just learn to adapt and get on with it.
Looking right across Europe, there seemed to be a lot of consternation about how to get football back started, or whether to cancel leagues completely. I know France, Belgium, Holland and Scotland all cancelled, and the rest kind of have came back in some form or another. Do you think there could have been probably better guidance from the footballing authorities in that, and how clubs and leagues could have got back playing?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, sort of your governing bodies like FIFA and UEFA, it could have been a global decision on football, because each league will have their own different challenges, and there's common themes like Champions League and Europa League that's still got to be played, and obviously tournaments were cancelled as well from a national perspective. But it could have been better in terms of that the top governing bodies could have sort of laid the law down a little bit and decided and made that decision whether they was all going to go back or whether I think for the Premier League, from a financial point of view, he's one of the biggest earners in the world. So that might, that would have been sort of a priority for them to get back, and they would have seen that. But other leagues might have seen it completely different. But it did need that, common decision, probably from the governing body, to say this is how we're going to plan it. This is how we're going to do. We're all going to go together at this stage, and we're all going to do this at this stage.
I mean, even looking at the EFL, there's certainly a feeling that at parts it's the tails wagging the dog, with it being left to individual leagues to determine how they're going to do it within the structure, and it all just felt a bit, not that they washed their hands of it, but they wanted the clubs to make decisions so they could have that in a little bit of distance from it if clubs later decide it wasn't the right decision.
Yeah, I think so. There wasn't that crystal clear clarity, as you mentioned, and the emphasis is on, probably a lot of it was on the clubs making those decisions when they had these gatherings of the CEOs and the owners to make these unanimous decisions of where the league would be, and I think it's very hard. I think what you say, some of these sort of governing bodies, the EFL, the FA, the Premier League, is when they make a decision like that. It's, say, for example, if they was to make an example, say the Premier League, you're now going to stop, and the teams in the bottom three you're going down, top three from the Championship, you're going up. I think because there's no law in that, there's no, you could end up with sort of severe lawsuits. Not so much from the clubs going up, because obviously they benefit, but definitely from the clubs going down. And their argument would be, we still get X amount of games to play. This is not judged fairly. And the teams in the middle, would have been okay with that either way, I think, because it's nothing really to play for them, especially, and the teams at the top playing for Europa places. It all affects them financially. So in one way, the bodies would, put the emphasis on those clubs to say, I can understand a little bit of that, because for them to make the decision for those clubs, there probably would have been 7 or 8 clubs in both of those leagues that it would have, could have been life or death to them. And to make those decisions for those clubs, as a governing body, you'd have had outroar. So it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario.
I don't know how much you keep up to date with Scottish football, but I mean, the situation up here is just like, we've obviously had a similar situation with like Hearts and Partick Thistle going down and stuff. It's like,
I followed that.
Yeah, are you like glad English football's missed that? Because our focus hasn't been on the restart of football. How do we get fans back into grounds? The headlines have all been Hearts and Partick Thistle are basically taking the other 40 clubs to court, essentially, is what it's been played out.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, sort of down here, he's glad that it could come to sort of a resolvement of at least playing, because then if teams do get relegated or they get promoted, and they can say, look, you've all come back together at the same time. You've all started this together. You're on an even playing field. The fans obviously are not there, but you're an even playing field in terms of team against team, and you'll get promoted or go down fairly. And they've haven't had to make that decision themselves, and they've kind of let the clubs, let football decide the fate of those particular clubs. And I think with that, a lot of clubs are still going to feel probably unjustified, probably feel the cluster of games is too much, the lack of preparations, and all those are really good, really good factoring points into that. But at the end of the day, it's, do you want football to restart as it is and continue as it is, given the current situation, and let's, work to those parameters? Or do we just say, no, it finishes all, and then risk, absolute chaos? So either way, you're in a difficult situation. But I think the general consensus down here that this was probably the best decision for your Championship and the Premier League to continue, especially with a vast amount of money at stakes.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that I struggled to get my head around a wee bit. I get that it was all to do with finances and stuff, but it was like Coventry City weren't allowed to kick off as St Andrews in League 1, League 2, and Birmingham City are still playing there. Like, I just, like, wee things like that, I was just like, how can one league kick off and then the league below or above it can a bit confusing.
Yeah, there is some, as I said, there's not clarity, there's not complete clarity on all of this. And I think, it can be very frustrating for some individuals, clubs within that, and you have to feel for them a little bit because they've got really strong cases. But I think they've just took an overview of the general consensus and gone with it. And when you're in these situations, you're not going to please everyone. There is going to be some unfair and probably unjustified effects on other clubs, which they all got merited cases to raise their points.
I suppose that's the problem, isn't it? There's in a situation like that, at least the Championship, you can get fair winners and losers. There are sort of no fair winners and losers in those situations.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why, to your colleague's opinion, to your colleague's question, that would be that, yes, you would like some clarity in saying this is how we're going to run, but like I say, if they made that decision for clubs, especially here in England, it would have caused, it would have caused chaos. So I think when you sort of make it and say that it's going to be a unanimous decision to what's going to happen, then you're sort of putting the emphasis on the clubs. Yes, it does create a little bit of distance so they can, they have, they're not going to get blamed. But also clubs can also say, well, you played your quota of games. You won or you lost. You either survived or you relegated. You got promoted or you attained a good position, and you've done it the same as everyone else. And there's no arguments in that.
What are you going to say, James?
Just getting back a little bit to the kind of more technical side of what it is that you do. There's been a big shift in recent seasons with managers, particularly towards younger ex-players, for a long, long time. Particularly in England and Scotland, it was at least perceived to be the same merry-go-round of the same faces. Why do you think we're now seeing a lot more guys who are just a few years out from hanging their boots up?
Yeah, I think the game has changed like that, and a lot of, especially in England, there's a lot of clubs that are, because this has been in place. This sporting director and head of football roles in Europe has been in place for years, and coaches and managers that have come from the continent are used to, especially Premier League, when there's been a lot of overseas managers and coaches, they're used to this structure. So with it being so rich with overseas sort of players and managers, it made sense for a lot of English clubs to have these sort of structures in place, and also to give opportunities to our own, to our own coaches that want to pursue a career, in management or coaching, and that they would have an opportunity now, and they'd be more, because they've only ever been a player. If they're coming into a new structure and there's a sporting director or director of football in place, they would understand that right from day one. As like you say, some of the more experienced managers that have been around a long time that haven't had that, haven't had to work with that, and probably have been a what we call a classic manager and full running of a football club. They might not be so accustomed, so open to this situation. But I think, especially now where the game is, these sort of roles are going to become more. There's going to become more demand for these roles, because it's football clubs now, compared to what you were, especially even in a championship, there's so many aspects that a manager or a head coach is his main sort of role that you want him to do is to win football games and develop players and concentrate on all the footballing aspects as well. And of course, there's still going to be in a lot of decision making processes with certain elements, but you want them to do what their expertise is, what they're good at, and that's to coach football players and to win football matches, and maybe even develop some of your younger players coming through. So I think it's gone full circle where clubs are looking at it and say, especially trading clubs, think they want to bring young players through and offer sort of a resale for the future. So they're continuing that livelihood and that financial flow through their club. And if you've got a structure in place and a philosophy that what your club adheres to, then that gives you a better choice of what type of manager and coach that you would want for your football club. You're still going to get the needs must basis, where clubs are in sort of situations of battling relegation and stuff. They might call upon an experienced manager to help them that has got an expertise in that. And and that might be but that could be just a short-term arrangement depending on the club and that particular manager. But I think for a long-term strategic vision, I think sort of the new generation coming through, or maybe the younger generation, as you highlighted, will be quite open to this because they've never experienced it before. And as you, especially in England, you just want them to concentrate on what they're good at, and just take the focus and the pressure off that way.
I always think as well, like, I don't know, going back to sort of this transfer merry-go-round, like, a lot of these young managers, I feel, that are already at clubs perhaps lower down the food chain and perhaps need a bit of compensation or whatnot to sort of get them out their existing contracts. Like, if clubs, like I know Burton, for example, got rid of Nigel Clough just due to the financial impacts of COVID. Do you think these older managers who are out of work start to come back in because it's simply logistically easier to get them into the job than it is a younger manager?
Yeah, there's always a case for that, and it depends on the club really. It all depends on where the club and where it is. Don't think there's no general answer for that. I think going forward, you'll probably see more clubs lean towards. You've got sporting directors at certain clubs. It's just, not just your Rangers and your Celtics. Hearts, Hibernians, Dundee United. Because there's so much other areas now that you want that some can sort of take away the responsibilities of what a manager can do. So, and the manager can just go in and concentrate on the players and their team and building those relationships and those cultures and bringing young players through and winning football matches. And the sporting director or technical director can drive the long-term vision and the process, and they work hand in hand together. They can develop a long-term relationship. And like you say, if you mentioned sort of some of the names there that you've mentioned, I think going forward, if a job becomes available, and I think if both parties are clear from the start, and this is where we are, and this is where the club is, this is what the club expects, and this is how we're going to work, then I think it'd be down to the individual manager and the club to become, agreeing. There's like an unwritten contract of this is how we're going to work. And if it does fall apart, then both sides are to blame.
Yeah. You going to say something, James, or
No, when you go.
Right, cool. Probably the next point is getting fans back into stadiums. I know obviously you're more focused on the technical football side of things, but I don't know how much you know about the sort of revenue at Huddersfield and things like that, but just how big is it for clubs to get fans back into the grounds?
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. It's a massive loss of revenue, not having that, and because that just impacts not just what they pay to watch the football match itself, but obviously the whole commercial aspect. Obviously, you've got the catering side of things, the shirt side of things coming into. You've got the whole sponsorships that that within the clubs that are not using the facilities. So you're losing a massive part of your income. Like a massive part of your income. Player trading is probably your most, and TV rights, especially with the big clubs, is probably going to be your main revenue streams, like your big bulk. But not having the fans in there is a severe loss to the game given the current situation, because revenue streams, yes, it's tragic that they can't come in, and the clubs, and especially some of the lower clubs, probably really are feeling that because they do rely. That'll be a massive percentage of what they rely on. So, whether my thinking was, but some of the basic thinking would be that when guidelines change in England, especially, that they might start to have X amount of stands open or X amount of start integrating it slowly, but then they'd have to work out of what fans, how can you prioritize what fans come to your games and not. So then, that's a good idea initially, but then everyone's going to feel left out. That why can he attend the game and I can't? So I think there's going to be, there's going to be some serious thinking around that, because they do want the fans back in, as quick as they can. And as soon as they allow that process, I don't think they're just going to have everyone back in. It'll be a gradual thing and done on a basis where X amount of capacity or stadium is full. So at least you're getting some revenue back in, and try and build it back in slowly. I mean, there's talks in England that the fans might not be back in until sort of in the new year next year. So, and then there's talk that they might come in sort of later on in the year on a gradual. So, yeah, as quick as they can come back in safely, it'd be great news, especially for the clubs, especially the smaller clubs from a revenue perspective. But it's also the safety first element of it.
I think as well. I think it's perhaps easier for League Two, League One clubs, but then when you get to that Huddersfield, where you're getting thousands, tens of thousands into grounds, it is then a case of, well, do you just get in because your name starts with an A, or you've been to so many away games and things like that? I think that's the things that are really tricky to work out.
Yeah, I think so, and that's going to be, that would have to. I think clubs would have to come together with the appropriate governing bodies and, discuss the best course of action of how and when that's going to happen, and probably the most fairest way. I
don't know as well. See, just because obviously Huddersfield have just been in this transition phase from Premier League to Championship, and you've got all the sort of financial rewards that come with the Premier League, does that sort of make you a bit more equipped to deal with the loss of fans for a sustained period of time than perhaps other Championship clubs?
In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no, because it's gone under new ownership of the football club, and it's gone under a new direction. So, yeah, you do get parachute payments when you do come down, and it does ease a little bit financially from that perspective. And Huddersfield, did sell a couple of players in the summer window as well for. I think 3 players left the club for generating revenues of over 20 million, but that doesn't mean necessarily that 20 million is all into your football club. It depends on how those payments were made. So those ones that I mentioned them were just before I arrived, but so there is revenue streams coming in, but it's not sometimes what all the fan thinks. And same with the parachute monies, it's not all given all at once, and same with transfer payments, they're not given all at once. So, and given the situation, yes, Huddersfield might be maybe a little bit cash richer than some, but if this carries on for too long, you're still going to suffer the same as everyone else with lots of revenue.
There is genuinely only so long. I wonder as well, how long is it going to take for some of the bigger clubs as well to sort of be hitting the top of this? They'll obviously be hit to some extent, but I think that when you start seeing your big clubs sort of, we need to do this and stuff to sort of even the books, that's when fans will start to sort of perhaps realise how big this could be.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is you can realign yourself back with the fans in this. And if you're like a Premier League club that beyond the top 6 or the top 8, for example, and you have good academies, I think as long as the fans see and you're clear with the fans and you communicate with the fans effectively and say, look, this is going to be our plan going forward. We want to bring more homegrown players coming through that represent your football club. And, this is how we're going to do it. This is going to be our long-term plan. I think fans can always relate to one of their own coming through, a top young talent coming through and putting on the shirt for their football club. And I think if they see, values being implemented on the pitch and players being given opportunities and chances, I think the fans can be a lot more forgiving as long as they know, outwardly what the club's ambitions are. You don't have to know all the intimate details, of course, like any business, but as long as they have a broad understanding, because at the end of the day, they're paying their money, so they have a right to know, what the club's sort of plans are from outwardly from that point of view. If they're going to say that we're going to be a club that's going to bring young players through, or we're going to be a club that we want to try and identify ourselves in this manner, at least the fans get a basic idea of what the expectations are when they come.
It's been interesting to sort of see sort of the communication between fans and clubs. Obviously, it's very, very key at most times, but certainly in this period,
yeah,
what clubs have been better with their fans than others, keeping them informed with different things.
Yeah, and I think during this period as well, a lot of clubs have done really well, especially in the UK, is they've done a lot of, when they couldn't physically get out, and you had the rules in place and lockdown was in place, there was a lot of stuff online where a lot of players were doing a lot of interactions with with fans. There was a lot of sort of chance for them to have sort of Q&As and open Q&As with their particular fans as well, or taking on certain challenges and have to keep the fans as much as engaged as you can with the players. They still got that connection, and I think that was quite important as well, because the fans still want to know what the players are up to, what they're doing during those tough periods. And as long as you've got that engagement with them from, and I think I speak that the majority of squads, that probably, I would say nearly all the players were involved in some sort of fan engagement or participation or support that, that they could do to keep that spirit going.
It just highlights how important sort of the communications and media teams at clubs are these days. You know what I mean? Like, I think in years gone by, they were just for like match reports and putting updates on Twitter, but now it's like, especially during this period, you've just seen how effective like a club's Twitter profile or Facebook profile can be. Yeah,
you can, and I think that's been good. This is where social media has probably come into its own. This is where you can use it to your advantage and your strengths, and keep that information ticking over. And then you can have, there's a variety of ways you can keep fans engaged with your football club now, using sort of like media platforms. And like you say, there's like the head of media of football clubs now, they don't just say, it's not just necessarily always the first team is probably the main focus point, but there's so many other areas that fans can be involved with and engage with. And I think that helps strengthen and support yourself as a sort of as a football club.
I think as well, you'll just have another kit reveal or something with no sponsor on it, or with a big sponsor on it to keep you going.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
You might see it, because obviously one of the clubs that I'm closest to, like Mull, are also sponsored by Paddy Power, and you obviously seen the Huddersfield stunt, and then you seen them with Mull, you're like, what?
Yeah, well, when I joined the club last year, there was sort of an ongoing entanglement with that, which I think they resolved in the end. But yeah, and I think it's, your commercial team has got to be sort of probably pretty mindful and active sometimes of what the message is you're trying to generate outwardly. And in the end, it all got resolved for Huddersfield, and it was, they was all friends and kissing made up quite nicely.
Good to hear. Right, final part, just the end of the season. Obviously, you're coming into the final straight of it, and Huddersfield, obviously, unfortunately, down the bottom. What are your thoughts heading into this sort of period, and for yourself as well, obviously?
Yeah. For myself, as sort of mentioned at the start of the show, I'm not sort of that head of football actively in the role anymore. But from outside looking in, Huddersfield have lost their last 2 games. And I think, the squad they have and the players they got, and knowing the managers as I do, and knowing the club and the temperament and the quality of the players, it's certainly they're in a difficult position. But, I would be fully confident that they can, especially over their next run of games, start to pick up some positive results and move away from that, because they went through a period, Huddersfield, earlier on in the season, where they was unbeaten in 8 games. And some key injuries just before Christmas, and in the Championship, you have sort of, you go through that period in sort of November, December, where you have games every 3 days. And at that time, they picked up some injuries. It was good in one way, because you got a chance for some young players to get, some minutes on the grass. But also, I think the volume of injuries didn't help, and obviously some of the results didn't help either. And then the January transfer window, we had some new players coming in to bed in, and some players gone out on loan, so there was a little bit of a transition there as well. So the performances have been good, and even with elements. I watched the Forest game, and there was elements in the game where the players took their chances. It would have changed the game. But I think the squad they got, and within that group, I'm sure they will have more than enough to to remain in the Championship and sort of reassess and reevaluate for next season going forward.
I know there was a big there was positivity when like the Cowleys came in, because obviously they'd done a good job at Lincoln. They seem to be on this merry-go-round, as we say, of young managers who are coming through who look like promising prospects.
Yeah, they're great guys. They were very good to work with. And that was kind of my remit when I first got to the club. I'd only been at the club 3 or 4 days, and Jan Sievert had been relieved of his sort of duties as head coach. And one of my main things is in this particular role was to identify a new up-and-coming manager, because that's what the club wanted going forward. They wanted to give an up-and-coming manager an opportunity. And Danny and Nicky had a great record with Lincoln, as you mentioned, but before that as well, from sort of non-league teams coming forward. They'd brought some young players through the Lincoln team. They were really sort of good value people, which resonated with the fans and community. They did a lot of work outside of football, and we felt we needed that as well back into the sort of the club, because Huddersfield's sort of a working class area. Football's like massive to them. So we wanted that real sort of engagement and that link between sort of club and fans, and they could be, a lot of the face for that, which they did do, and just their general demeanour, just to lift, because the club, when they first come in, even though they lost their first couple of games, the club have been on such a bad run. They hadn't won a game since January, so we just thought, them two coming in, bringing that new positivity and vibe at the time would change the dynamics in the dressing room and the club, and it did. And I'm sure this year was always, they knew was going to be a steady year for them. The club's expectations wasn't to try and bounce back up to the Premier League. The club's ambition was to be in transition and just to remain, in the Championship, reevaluate the squad at the end of the season, and and then it was over a 2-3 year plan that they would look to sort of progressively make their way and try and challenge for those playoff places and maybe even further.
Yeah, I think it's like, obviously you were saying there that they'd went from sort of the January to maybe August, September time without a win. It can be really hard. Like, I don't know if you know the example of Brecon City, but they were in the Scottish Championship and were the small team in that league. They played a really tough season, and it didn't win. I don't think they won a game, and just came right the back down, and they finished bottom of the Scottish professional pile. Now, that's not to say you are going to go all the way down to League Two and be fighting down there, but it just shows that it can be really hard to almost be losing mentality, just not winning, and then all of a sudden trying to pick up a load of wins can be harder than it looks.
Yeah, it is, and that psychological effects, it's devastating, because you, as a club, you're sort of hoping just to break the duck, if you like, when you're going through that period, just to break the duck and just to get that first win under your belt and get a bit of momentum. And there was a period of time where, Danny got manager of the month through October, and Huddersfield went on a great streak, beating some really good teams, and things like Brentford within the mix of that as well. So the capabilities in the squad were there, and a lot of it is not down to the individual quality of the players, because they're there. But I think they took such a psychological battering in the Premier League of not winning a game, and then that continued a little bit into the Championship, that sometimes you can play catch up with yourselves a little bit. So your confidence does ride purely just on a run of results, and when you are in those pressure situations, it certainly does test you, not only as a player but as a human being. But as I said, I think Huddersfield have enough quality from the playing side and from the mentality side to sort of overcome this sort of small bad start they've had, and pick up a good run of games and hopefully some positive results, and get themselves a little bit of daylight between them and the chasing sort of lower pack.
James, you get anything to add?
No, that's good for me. Cool,
brilliant. Thanks for your time, David. Just what's the picture for you then? Obviously on the lookout for a new challenge.
Yeah, there will be. I've had some sort of conversations with other clubs, which I can't say at the moment. For myself, I think I'd look to start maybe sort of when the new season starts, or towards the end of this season would be my ideal time to start, just to let this unravel a little bit. But no, definitely keen to sort of go back into an exciting new project, and one that obviously can suit my skill set.
I mean, Right, well, loved having you on. Hopefully have you on again soon when you get a new club sorted, and wish you all the best with that.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes and Podbean, and until next time, take it easy.